Hi, Marissa here. I hope everyone enjoyed their holidays. Now here's my gift to you. It's extra drama from Sweet Valley High Book 2, Secrets. I'll continue the discussion with my guest, Adaora Nwandu, as we explore her evolution into a keeper of the divine secrets of the Wakefield twins while she was growing up in England and Nigeria. So I'm here with Adaora Nwandu, and one thing that I really wanted to talk with you about is you said that you read the Sweet Valley High novels as a girl.
Yes.
But unlike other friends of mine who have read the series, you weren't reading the books here in America.
Nope.
You were reading about California twins and their friends in Sweet Valley, California, from another place. I was just hoping you would talk a little bit about where you were and what that was like.
I stumbled upon the Sweet Valley twins just completely by myself. I was in a bookshop when I was little, and I was a voracious reader. My mum would just let me go mad in this bookshop and just buy as many books as I wanted. And I came across this tiny series of Sweet Valley twins. I thought, oh, this looks interesting. These little girls are older than I am, and I don't know where they are, but the cover was fascinating enough for me to go for it. So I think I bought one initially. I had my mum pay for one. I must have been about 8. So we're talking about 30 years ago. And
where were you?
Oh, I was in England. I was in England at the time. And so I bought one, and it was pretty good. So next time we went to the shop, I saw there was a whole series. So we bought a bunch of them. And I remember taking them to boarding school with me the following year or 2 years afterwards. And I had a pretty hefty collection by then. I would say at least 15, 20. And people would borrow. That was the thing I remember the most about my first term. Everyone borrowed my books, and no one ever returned them.
So you had a lending library.
I essentially had
a taking library.
Yeah, a gifting library, it turned out. And my teachers got quite concerned because I think my mum would mention that I never came back with any books. And it didn't bother me. I just thought, well, I've read them and I'm happy other people are reading them. So it was a pleasure. But I don't remember us ever talking about these kids in 6th grade who lived in California. And the only reference I had then was they're 12 years old, so that must be the age you are in 6th grade. And that was my anchor for kind of trying to understand where these older kids were coming from.
Well, even the concept of 6th grade, the way that you guys talk about grades in England is different.
Completely.
So grade 6 would have been something...
For us, I was in an interesting boarding school as well. So for us, it would have been, let me see, at 10 you're in lower 3, so 11 you're in upper 3, lower 4. So my school did the system of lower than upper, lower than upper. So it would have been lower 4, which for us was like the oldest kids in our little junior house before you go on to the senior school where everyone's like really old. So they seemed like they were pretty mature, but they didn't act like they were mature. But I do remember just being slightly fascinated. But then after boarding school, I went back to Nigeria, and by then I was into Sweet Valley High. So I think at the age of 12, 13, I had at least 20 or so Sweet Valley High novels. And I was the official lending library in Enugu. And I'd learnt my lesson from boarding school where everyone used to complain I never kept any of the books. I wrote my name, my address in every single book, and lots of people would come and try and borrow them. But I was puritanical with the borrowing. I would give everyone a book to write and sign and follow up, and still it was seen as this huge, huge honor to be allowed to take one of the Sweet Valley Highs from Adora's library because she was very, very strict about who she lent them to. But again, we never really discussed the fact that contextually it made very little sense to us, apart from the fact that, we're in Enugu, which is also a small town with a vibrant community. There's lots of ranges of economy, people with good money and new money and people with old money. And I don't know, it was just very, we could relate on that side. And of course, the weather, the California weather was very similar to what we were experiencing, and the cliqueiness of it. And just as you go through the years, but again, high school, junior, they were freshmen. It was
the basic concept of they're juniors in the book, but the basic concept of what is this high school and where are they and who are these people and what are the things they care about.
Exactly.
Was unfamiliar in Enugu.
It was familiar in terms of what they cared about, just the structures of their school, that was unfamiliar. But we definitely could relate to what they were going through, because as I described in our episode 2, I ended up going through something like that later. So I had the books and I would read them for a few years. But it was, for me, I think what holds the biggest memory is how the books circulated and how it just became a thing in our town, Adora's Sweet Valley High Library.
Oh, I can picture it.
And years later, I think at least a decade later, I think sometime in my 20s, I got this random call from this guy saying he's now at that point in his life where he's ready to forgive me. That I had one of my best friends was his crush throughout school, and he loved everything about her. And just because I'd taken against him, she would just not even exchange the time of day with him. However, at one point, he managed to get hold of one of my Sweet Valley Highs, and he saw some crumbs in them. And he could imagine that my friend must have read this book at some point, because she was in my inner circle, and only my inner circle would get these books easily.
Oh my gosh.
So he imagined that crumb might be hers, and so he'd saved them and eaten some of them just to feel close to her.
Oh my God.
And just, I mean, like, it was such an interesting part of my life, these Sweet Valley Highs, and just how they come around and go around, and they'll still be something that people talk about, how Adora's ironclad hold on her Sweet Valley Highs when I was there back in Nigeria was just, such a thing.
I am sure that through the life of this podcast, I will have many guests, but I highly doubt that any of them will have a story like that.
I know it.
I love that. I'm remembering now that I had some book plates that I was given as a gift that I put in the front of as many of my books as possible. This book belongs to Marissa.
Yes.
So, I would scroll it in there and stick it in there, and I loved these book plates, and I never loaned my books to a soul. People saw them and looked at them, but I never even thought to loan my books out. Maybe I did. Maybe I offered. I don't know.
It's such a weird thing. I think instinctually in me, I always saw books as something that should be shared. But I got such terrible feedback about never having any of my books back. When I was younger, I became the person who from my teachers who were so concerned. They felt as if I'd probably go home without the shirt on my back if I continued the way I was going. So I thought, okay, things need to be kept, and you need to get things back, and you need to be very, very careful who you lend things to. So that was the spirit I had. But when I left Nigeria, it was also something that friends were talking about, and cousins and different people. I left my room unguarded, and all the Sweet Valley Highs were lined up, and Sweet Valley Twins were lined up on my bookshelf. But the first thing everyone did when I left to go back to England to go to university for a few years was they went and they plundered my library. So even now, you go to different parts of Enugu, you'll see a Sweet Valley High on someone's bookshelf, and it's probably mine, because they weren't coming in from anywhere else. It's such a funny thing. And I remember everyone being like, we've got your books now, and me thinking, this is hilarious. I don't even care.
Amazing.
I don't even care.
You had brought them with you from England.
I brought them, and every time I came to England on vacation, I'd just buy a few more. So my collection just continued to grow. And once I've read it once, they're not the sort of things that you necessarily feel like you need to go back to. So in theory, or 15, 20 years later, you go back to them and you enjoy it. But they weren't something you would hold down for reference, which is probably why I didn't learn the lesson I should have learned from Secrets. But even now, I know it's just so funny. And I'm back to that spirit with books again, where once I've read it and I lend it out, I don't really care if I get it back.
Right. Now, I love to lend books. It's so nice to be able to share the thing that you've read with your friend.
Yeah.
In fact, you read a book and think, oh, I wish that my particular friend had this same insight. I think this would be helpful to them. And,
absolutely.
And you give it to them, lend it to them, hoping that they'll actually read it. But that's been a fun thing about doing this podcast, is that it's been fun to share the books with friends and talk about them, something that is special to me. So I appreciate that it is also very special to you. Really on a much like deeper, more elemental level, I think, than even to myself. So that's beautiful.
Yeah, I think that's why when I came across the fact that you were doing blogs on this, and I really haven't talked about them with anyone in decades. I think the last time I had a conversation about them was when there was a TV series, and I kept thinking, these girls don't look like what we were taught by the covers.
No, we know from these James Matthews photos. Sorry, I even call them photos. The paintings are so beautiful. Yeah. That is what these girls look like,
yes,
absolutely. And the other characters, too.
In
fact, actually, in this book, Secrets, there is a time when it is described that Enid has her hair pulled up in combs, like diamond combs. Yes. Or crystal. And I was trying to picture it. And I was thinking, but Enid has such short hair. And I just... Enid had not been depicted at this point the book was written. But later on, she would get her own covers, and she would have this sort of short, only like ear-length hair.
Yeah, but it was... Am I forgetting her? Because I feel like it was short and it was ear-length, but it was kind of slightly wavy. Or was it just straight and pixie-ish? Because I imagined her as a young Emma Samms from Dynasty when she was still playing, I think, Fallon or something like that. So that was my image of Enid, just short kind of, and I could imagine absolutely, because you wouldn't be able to tie hair like that back. It would have to be combs that would hold it up because you can't gather it together.
Yes, exactly. So you can picture the combs, but I was just trying in my mind's eye to get a clear sense of what they meant by up with combs.
And Bruce Patman, oh my goodness, he's another one who's just...
Largely because of the paintings, but I think even without the paintings, I think of Bruce Patman as looking kind of like a human Ken doll.
But he's dark-haired, no? But he has laser blue eyes.
Some Kens have dark hair.
That is true, that is true.
But you're right, the typical Ken. Oh, you're right, Enid's hair is a little bit longer.
Yeah, I remember also, that's very Emma Samms-ish. But I remember how, just reading it again, how their blondness was just seen as the epitome of beauty, that if you were blonde, you were in. And then the dark-haired people were lucky if they were pretty as well, because, despite their dark hair, they were able to rise above it and be gorgeous. And I thought I must have taken a lot of that in, because when I was young and first back in England, I went for the blonde, blue-eyed Ken doll type people. And I thought, this is Sweet Valley. That's what indoctrinated me. But
interesting. Well, that's something that is, in my mind's eye, also is kind of interesting to think about you and your friends in Nigeria reading the books about these almost exclusively white people in the beautiful blondes. And most of them are very beautiful Californians. And did it seem exotic, or...?
It did seem exotic, but then again, most of the films we watched depicted Westerners.
Oh, fair enough.
So it was in that same context. But then, I think what made them even more powerful as images for us is that they were around our age, as opposed to a lot of people were seeing back then who were a lot older. We weren't getting the same shows, apart from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, that showed anyone around our age. So yeah, we had Fresh Prince, and then we had the young people in Sweet Valley High.
Well, I do love to think of the idea that predominantly you guys were relating to these characters rather than seeing them.
Absolutely.
Seeing the ways in which they were different from you. So.
I think especially somewhere like Enugu, where it felt like a sweet valley. And
yes,
Enugu,
you mentioned that in the last week's episode.
Exactly. And also the fact that Enugu translates to being on top of a hill. That is what the name of the city means. And so we weren't in the valley, we were on top of the hill, but living the same sort of life that you have, where you're kind of isolated from the harsh realities of the political situation, which was very tumultuous in Nigeria at the time. But it was also kind of like a civil service town where you had your families and you had your schools. And we, young people, were what generated the gossip. And the gossip would travel across the entire city or town. It was just very much... We felt like masters of our own universe, the same way I guess these Sweet Valley High kids did.
I am thinking though now that how delicious it would be to have like political turmoil in the world of Sweet Valley High. Yes. not that I'm really looking for any more political turmoil in my life right now.
I know, right?
But, yeah, that would have been interesting. But I love that. That's really cool.
And I'm sure all sorts of crazy stuff was happening in the US when this was set, but in Sweet Valley, you just don't really feel it. The end of the civil rights movement or whatever, it's just, you don't know what's going on.
And politically, very rarely mentioned, you know, the names of presidents or anything, governors.
I'm curious though. Tell me, have they updated anything? Is there any edition where it's kind of slightly more recent?
Actually, a number of years ago, they started re-releasing the books, and I took a look at a couple of them, but I couldn't really stomach it because the one big change that I noticed was that instead of being a size 6, the twins were a size 4.
No!
I kid you not. It
they
made my blood boil. Yeah.
That's so confusing.
Yeah. So that was then. You know, now, if it were now in 2017, only 10 years later, or less than that, I can't remember exactly when these came out, but it was in the past decade. Less than 10 years ago. But I actually feel like if they tried to do it now, it's interesting to think. I think that it would... Well, first of all, I don't think it would work.
I don't know.
You have to make some dramatic changes. I love these books as a time capsule and as a glimpse into not only what the past was actually like, than what you wish it were like or the way you nostalgically remember it, and then taking a critical look at them. Yeah. You realize, some of this was not healthy.
Problematic, truly problematic.
And some of the things that we were presenting to young girls in this time period were less helpful than others.
So true.
Although, then again, how helpful is it to have your lead characters be, skinnier than ever in the new edition?
Yes, I know. That is such an interesting change, because I do feel that even reading this, I could feel the relatively decent feminist undertones of and underpinnings of everything that was going on, and how it was very much about the women looking out for each other. Even if, there were women who were backstabbing each other, it didn't feel like it was the catty claws out. It was more how do they put it? I don't want to say a masculine way, but it was very much the art of war. Lang Tzu sort of, this is how strategically a Machiavellian would approach their enemy. Sure. So given the true respect, rather than this kind of sense of random, let's have a mud wrestling fight, because, this is for the entertainment of men. I thought that was also a useful thing to keep in mind at that tender age in my little town in Enugu, and also when I was living in the big city of London, where this just felt exotic and very warm as opposed to the wet weather that I was dealing with daily.
Oh, true. Yeah. Other than Ronnie, the men in this book, Secrets, are largely used as pawns in this war between the female characters. That's true. There is a sort of kind of militant feminist almost perspective, whether you're talking Machiavelli or Sun Tzu. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's such an interesting perspective. I am thinking about how, as an American reading the books in the Midwest, grew up in the Midwest, and when I read the Sweet Valley Twins and Sweet Valley Kids books, I was shielded a little bit from the kind of physical beauty aspect, because the books, as I recall, were less like that, and I'm kind of glad that I wasn't reading the high books at that age, because I don't know exactly what I would have taken away from them. But I'm delighted that I have them in my life now.
The nostalgia of just rereading this was just so sweet. Not bitter sweet, just plain sweet. And just thinking, I'm so glad I had this growing up, and just this window into a different way. Even if none of it was real, it was still fun.
Definitely fun. Well, and I had a great time today talking with you. Thank you for having me to your beautiful home.
Oh, thank you. Thank you
in beautiful Los Angeles. You made it west to California eventually. I am
still hankering after living in a split-level Spanish-style house like these kids did. But yeah, I'm almost there, Jessica and Elizabeth. I will get there.
Someday we'll all have our Spanish-style split-level ranch with the tiled floors.
Oh my goodness me.
And the red Fiat Spider out front.
Oh, of course. Where would we be without the Fiat Spider?
That's it for this week's extra drama bonus episode. Happy holidays to everybody, and I hope you'll tune in next Thursday when somehow it's going to be 2018, and we'll be discussing Playing with Fire, book number 3 in the Sweet Valley High saga. I'd love to hear about your experiences growing up reading the Sweet Valley books, or maybe you discovered them later in life. Send me an email at sweetvalleydiaries@me.com, or send me a tweet at Sweet Valley. We're also at Sweet Valley Diaries on Instagram. Thanks so much to Don Flaxbart, Lauren Shippen, Jocelyn Schofield, and to Mary Kate Battles. See you next time.